The Michael Berry Show.
Senator Ted Cruz, which Chuck Schumer are we supposed to believe?
Well, he hopes that no one has a memory of even 5 minutes ago, much less years ago, and I think that's the cynicism we see of Washington Democrats, sadly, more and more each day.
How important is President Trump's speech to the nation tomorrow night?
Well, I think it is important. It depends what he says tomorrow. I don't know what he's going to say tomorrow night. I think the issue is critically important. We have got to secure the border. Despite Schumer's older speeches that you were playing there, Washington Democrats are digging in with everything they've got to prevent building a wall and prevent securing the border, and that's because the sad reality is that Washington Democrats have decided illegal immigration is good for them politically. I think the vast majority of Texans, vast majority of Americans disagree with that, want to see common sense border security, and are not happy with the Schumer shutdown, where Democrats have gone so far as partially shut the government down to stop securing the border.
Senator Ted Cruz, your proposal has received a lot of attention, and that being having El Chapo pay for the wall.
Well, that's right, and this is an idea that I put forth a couple of years ago and just reintroduced, and as we were arguing about the wall, Democrats began shifting to their talking point that, well, building a wall is too expensive. Now set aside for a second the irony that this may be the first time in the history of humanity that Washington Democrats thought anything was too expensive.
Right.
I mean, they're literally willing to run the printing presses, light it, make a pile of money, and light it on fire. But when it comes to using the money for securing the border, suddenly that's too expensive.
Have you talked to Sean Penn? Maybe he could run this up the poll and see if El Chapo might just consent to it.
I think he's probably a little busy dealing with his criminal issues.
You got some new committee assignments.
I did. I'm now on the Foreign Affairs Committee, which is going to be, I think, particularly important, strengthening America's role and leadership in the world, standing by our allies, and defeating our enemies.
Does that mean withdrawing from Syria, and is a promise by the Turkish government not to attack the Kurds? Is that going to be enough?
I am concerned about the Kurds, and the question you raised there is a serious one. The Kurds have stood with us repeatedly, and more than once they've been abandoned by us, and they've been strong allies against ISIS. They were strong allies against Saddam Hussein before that, and the animosity from the Turks have been fair weather friends at best, and so I'm concerned about that. I will say this, though. I do think also some of the caterwauling that we've seen from Democrats and the media and even a number of Republicans about the president's pulling troops out of Syria, I do think some of that is exaggerated, in that many of those same voices were the same voices that were defending the disastrous Iranian-Obama nuclear deal. And I think any way you look at it, Iran is the greatest threat in the Middle East, and so I think the hysteria over 2,000 troops in Syria is a bit much. I share the concern you raised about the Kurds, and I think we need to be vigilant about that. But I do think many of the people attacking the president were looking for a reason to attack him anyway.
Yeah, well, I was asking the question. I'm actually for withdrawal, and I'll disagree with a lot of people over that. And we ought to be talking about these sorts of things. But to the extent, and I agree, that Iran is our biggest threat in the region, if not the world, on a military battlefield, Saudi Arabia is our friend and someone that we use as an ally to deal with Iran. Have we turned the corner on the Khashoggi issue being some way that we're supposed to bash the Saudis? Because that concerned me.
It concerns me too, and I hope so. Listen, what the Saudis did to Khashoggi was wrong. They should not be taking journalists into an embassy and murdering them. And I have to admit the lurid details that have been released, I mean, seem like a bad episode of Homeland or 24. That's not conduct that any nation should be conducting. That being said, nobody was under illusions that the Saudis were good actors. They've always been problematic actors, but in dealing with the Middle East, there are a lot of problematic actors, and the Saudis are probably the most important regional counterpoint to Iran. And there is a difference. Iran is led by the Ayatollah Khamenei, who is a genocidal, homicidal maniac who wants to murder Americans. Now, compare it in that context, weakening the Saudis is a bad thing for American national security interests. In my view, the touchstone of our foreign policy, the touchstone of our military policy, should be the vital national security interests of the United States. And so weakening the Saudis against Iran is bad for America. It's bad for Israel. So I hope, and I do think some of the vigor of the last month or so in Washington of slamming the Saudis, I think some of that has been spent.
All right. Senator, can you hold with us for just a moment?
Sure.
We're going to talk about China and tariffs and Obamacare and Senator Cruz's, sorry, Freudian slip there, Senator Cruz's proposal for a constitutional amendment for term limits. And what about what Mitt Romney said and more? We might even bring up his beard coming up. Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. Senator, President Trump will be in Texas, southern Texas, your state, McAllen, on Thursday. Obviously, there's a review of the border and bringing attention to what appears to be the top issue on his agenda right now. What do you hope comes of that?
Well, I hope what comes of that is that the critical urgency of securing the border becomes clear to the American people, despite the obfuscation, despite all the smoke and mirrors from the media and the Democrats, and the absolutely unreasonable and partisan obstruction of the Democrats becomes transparent. You've got Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi who have forced a partial government shutdown because, for purely partisan reasons, they don't want to give in to the president on anything. That they claim $5 billion is too much to build a wall. Most of the congressional Democrats have previously voted for $40 billion in border security and building a wall. And so they're just behaving like brazen partisans. The media is covering up for them. And so I think the president's going to the border and shining a light on the challenges and the security threats we have is a positive thing.
Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. A sign out of the 100% of the blame or the reasoning behind the motivation. You know, if you look at Chuck Schumer particularly, but Harry Reid did it, and Nancy Pelosi has even done it, and Barack Obama did it, and Hillary Clinton did it. Democrats up until recently were willing to talk about the need to deal with illegal immigration, and they talked in the way that Trump does, maybe not using the same words. All of a sudden, they've made a big change in that. To what extent is what they're doing today playing to their base and opposing Trump? And to what extent is it that they really don't want this wall built?
I think it is virtually 100% playing to their base. The Democrats right now, particularly after this last election, have unleashed their demons. They have unleashed the extreme left-wing voices in their party. And as a consequence, they really are captive of them. I think we're going to see for the next 2 years out of the House of Representatives nonstop investigations and subpoenas. I think we'll see impeachment. And I think it's because the screaming, angry mob on the left has been empowered. And that far left, when it comes to border security, they oppose it. They have decided politically illegal immigration is good for the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, that's where most Washington Democrats are right now, is that they are in a position, well, they'll do anything they can to stop reasonable efforts to secure the border. And that is profoundly out of step with most Americans.
The Mexican government has benefited from the flow of funds from illegals who come to this country wired back to Mexico. But the president's also putting a lot of pressure on them to do something about it, and they're seeing an influx of illegal immigrants, these caravans coming through their country. Is this Mexican administration our ally, our enemy, or somewhere in between in solving this problem?
You know, it's hard to say. There's obviously a new president in Mexico, so we'll see we'll see what kind of policies he enacts and how he behaves. That being said, Mexico, at least historically, has been some of both. They've been an ally at times, but at times they haven't done nearly enough to help stop illegal immigration. I do think the Trump administration has leaned in very vigorously, both with the outgoing Mexican government and the incoming Mexican government, to get more cooperation. And we've seen some promising signs, but I think the proof is in the pudding. And one of the things that is so critical is right now, most of the illegal immigration we're seeing are not people who are Mexican nationals coming in illegally, but rather they are people from Central America who are crossing through Mexico but are not themselves from Mexico. What that means is that Mexico could be much, much more effective securing their own southern border, which is much, much smaller than their northern border, which is obviously our southern border. That's a much easier place to cut off the illegal caravans and flow, and I think we've seen some cooperation from the Mexican government. I hope we see more.
You've taken a leadership role on repealing the worst elements of Obamacare, and while there's not been an outright repeal, there has been an important case recently with regard to the individual mandate. Skinny repeal didn't pass. I'd blame John McCain in part for that. What opportunities can we expect this Senate with a now Pelosi-led House to make in improving the problems Obamacare caused?
Well, Michael, I got to say there are areas where I'm optimistic. There are areas where I'm not. In the short term, when looking at this Democratic House, it is hard to be optimistic. I think we need to repeal Obamacare. I think it has been a disaster for millions of Americans. It has jacked up premiums massively. The average family's premium's gone up over $5,000 a year because of Obamacare. I hear from Texans all the time they can't afford health insurance. I think what we need to do instead is have more competition, more choice, more options, more consumer freedom, and the result of that would be lower premiums for Texans and Americans who want health insurance. But I think the chances of a Nancy Pelosi House passing anything along the lines of what I'm discussing are virtually zero. I think the Democratic Party, they're having a debate about going on to full-on socialized medicine and having the federal government take over health care and be in a position to ration health care and deny people the health care they need ultimately, which is what happens whenever you have government-controlled health care. And so I think we're going to face 2 years of obstruction from the House, which means our window for finishing the job, we should have finished the job last year, but our window for finishing the job is likely going to be at least 2 years from now, where hopefully we retake the House and then can finish the job and deliver on our promises.
Have a little over a minute left in this segment. Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. The president took a hard line on China, imposing tariffs. Farmers have hurt. I'm a free trader, and I know you are as well, but it would appear Commerce Secretary is saying that we're on the verge of a deal we can live with. Where are we with regard to the Chinese?
I don't know the specifics. I've heard the same encouraging signs from the administration you have. I do think China has not been a good actor when it comes to trade. That they block many American goods and services. They implement a number of non-tariff barriers to stop us from selling into their market. They also steal our intellectual property. So I'm glad that the president is leaning in hard on China to get them to stop doing that. I support free trade and opening up markets, but I think we need to defend ourselves, and I think leaning in on China is a good thing to do in that regard. There's
been talk in just the first week, now outliers, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for instance, about increasing tax rates, but the Democrats seem to be lining up to do that. Is that going to happen in the coming year?
I do not believe we'll see a tax increase in the coming year. We may well see it pass out of the House, but I think the House will pass a lot of things that are economic nonsense and that would hurt jobs and hurt Americans. Hopefully, though, in the Senate, we'll have the good sense to stop that. I mean, this last election, Democrats took the House, but we grew our majority in the Senate. That's a good thing.
Right.
I think we're likely to see more paralysis rather than really, really bad policy passing into law.
One moment. More of our conversation with Senator Ted Cruz on term limits, his constitutional amendment, and what Mitt Romney did coming up. Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. You have proposed a constitutional amendment with regard to term limits. Tell us about that and why.
Term limits is a policy that Texans and Americans overwhelmingly support by big bipartisan majorities. I've introduced a constitutional amendment that would limit House members to a maximum of 3 terms, which would be 6 years, that would limit senators to a maximum of 2 terms, that would be 12 years. And the biggest reason is I don't think there could be anything more important we could do structurally to drain the swamp than getting rid of the career politicians in both parties, Republicans and Democrats, and getting back really to the vision of the framers of citizen legislators who go and serve some time in Congress and then return to their states and return to working for a living.
There's always been the argument that's made that you just increase the power of staffers and bureaucrats if they know that they can wait someone out.
I understand that argument. I got to say, before I was elected to the Senate, I supported term limits. Having been here and seen it firsthand, I now support them 1,000 times more. And the reason is that if you look in Congress, the dominant instinct in Congress is risk aversion, is both in the Senate and House. People want to get reelected, and it just swamps everything else. And as a result, when you sit down to discuss any issue, people are afraid, they're timid, they're scared of their own shadows, because to address any important issue, to address any difficult issue, to stand and fight entails risk. It means you may be attacked. It means you may be criticized. It means donors may flee from your campaign. And as a result, elected officials are focused overwhelmingly with getting reelected. I think with term limits, we would instead have people willing to stand up for the principles they believe in, because they wouldn't be just tunnel vision focused on, I've got to get reelected and stay in Washington.
Senator Ted Cruz, you have just begun your second term after a real dogfight in the state of Texas against a very, very well-financed and well-organized and executed candidate. As you begin this second term, it would appear things are quite different from you. You're no longer the sole vote standing against the tide, but you appear to be a guy that the president, and he said this at his rally for you here in Texas just before you were reelected, a guy that he respects and that he leans on. How often do you talk to President Trump, and what is the state of your relations?
The president and I would say, have a very good relationship. We speak frequently, sometimes once, twice, 3 times a week, sometimes less frequently than that. I last sat down with the president right before the shutdown. I and a handful of other senators went to the White House and spent a considerable amount of time with him talking about border security. The president was urging my colleagues to stand up and fight for the wall, and I agree with them on that it makes sense to stand and fight. And there are things Donald Trump says and does that I don't agree with, that I wouldn't say, but I have been very proud to work closely with him to enact positive policies that have benefited 28 million Texans, that have produced record low unemployment, and that have made America safer and more secure. I think that's good for Texas and good for the country. Incoming
and now Senator Mitt Romney said some very harsh things about the president. How harmful was that?
I thought that was very disappointing. I was sad to see Mitt write that op-ed. It was not lost on anybody that Mitt didn't write that op-ed before Election Day. That he waited till after Election Day, till after he'd been elected, to say that. I don't think it's beneficial for Republicans to play the role of chief critic of the president, and I hope that's not the role Mitt steps into. I hope instead he rolls up his sleeves and is willing to actually go to work delivering on our promises. That's what I've urged President Trump. It's what I've urged my colleagues to do. It's very simple. Let's do what we said we would do. And what I would encourage Mitt and everyone else to do is, rather than throw rocks and criticize, urge what is the right path. So listen, Mitt is absolutely right that we should behave with civility. We should treat people with respect. We should behave in a way that brings honor and dignity to the offices we've been elected to. I agree with that. I just don't think it's helpful to amplify the constant media drumbeat excoriating not only President Trump, where everything he does is wrong and the media is telling, but also at the end of the day, those same media voices are attacking conservatives and the American people because they don't want common sense policies that most Americans want to see adopted actually adopted in the law.
MichaelBerry.com